Hello everyone. It's time for another flipped lesson. Today we're going to talk about tax tips and discounts. So make sure you have your notes and something to write with, and let's get started. Make sure that you complete the review it section. We need to know this information. It's kind of like a warm-up so that we will be able to do the know it section. Once you've completed the review it section, let's find out what we need to know about tax tips and discounts. So let's find tax tips and discounts. To do that, we are going to use those benchmark percents that we've been talking about in class. And we want to use those benchmark percents to find the percent of an original price or a base price. So looking at example number 1, we have 5% tax on $235. So we want to figure out what is 5% of $235. So we're going to figure out some benchmark percents that would be helpful for 5%. We can find 10% by moving the decimal. So we will have $23.50. Remember, when we find 10%, we move the decimal one place to the left. Then we want to find 5%. 5% is half of 10%. So I can take half of my value of $23.50 and I get $11.75. So 5% is $11.75. That's using our benchmark percents. Let's see if we can find 15% tip on $17.80. So I use the 10% benchmark again, and I will get $1.78 plus 5%. 10% plus 5% is my 15% that I'm looking for. So 5% would be half of $1.78, which is 89 cents. And I can add those together to equal my 15%, and I get $2.67. So 15% tip on $17.80 is $2.67. Let's try number 3. We have 30% off $25.90. When we go to the store, sometimes we see a sale price that might say 30% off. Let's figure out how much I would get discounted for $25.90. So first, let's think what benchmark percents would be helpful. I think 10% would be helpful. So we want to find out 10% of $25.90. Moving the decimal, that is equal to $2.59. Well, if I have 10%, I can add 10% 3 times to equal my 30% that I'm looking for. So let's add 10% 3 times. And we get $7.77. So 30% of $25.90 is $7.77. Now let's do $72 discounted 55%. That just means I'm going to have 55% off of $72. Let's see how much that comes to. Benchmark percents that would be helpful would be 50% and 5%. But in order to find our 5%, we are also going to have to find 10%. So I will also have to find that 10% so that I can get half of that. So let's see what 50% of $72, that would be half. That's $36. And then 10% of $72, I would move the decimal, so I would have $7.20. But now I want to take half to get this 5%. So half of $7.20 is $3.60. So I can do my 55% is $39.60. $39.60 is 55% of $72. So now that we know how to find percents using our benchmarks, find tips, taxes, discounts, well, let's use them in word problems and let's figure out what the final cost would be when we use tax, tips, and discounts. So hopefully you have finished the review it section and figured out whether or not we're going to add or subtract for each one of these, because those are the words that we're going to see in our word problems. So let's try a few examples. We have a taxi fare to the train station that is $15.40, and I'm going to give that driver a 15% tip. So I have $15.40 and I need to give a 15% tip. So how much was the taxi fare? Well, we know that tips are things that you add. It's what you're giving. So I'm going to have to add a tip, but I need to figure out 15% of my fare. So since I